The stigma of a dog lead. If you were doing something like driven grouse, or you were in a butt, you were shooting low partridges coming at you, or there was a particular reason that if your dog got off and ran, there's a chance that it could ruin the shooting and it could potentially get injured, just pop them on a lead. Hi, my name's Charlie Thorburn. Welcome to More Dog Gun Dogs. I just wanted to have a quick chat about dog leads. So there's almost like a sort of ego stigma type thing going on when it comes to putting your dog on a lead. Whether that's just I can walk my dog along the street off a lead, or I can have my dog off a lead on my peg, or I can't have my dog off a lead, but I have it off a lead anyway. And I just wanted to talk about it because I can see both sides. Because when I was young and starting doing all this, I was like, I don't need dog leads. My dogs are great. I don't need dog leads. And it was definitely a sort of chest puffing moment where I felt like I didn't need a dog lead. Therefore, I was just, a little bit, I'd done a good job, or I was a little bit better than somebody else or whatever. And actually the older I've got and the less I care about what people think about me, the more pragmatic I've got about leads. And there's definitely scenarios where it's handy if your dog doesn't have to be on a lead. That's what we're all aiming for. We don't really ever want to need to have to put our dog on the lead, but that doesn't mean we don't ever want to put our dog on a lead. If I was walking through a busy kind of traffic area, I would, if I could, if I was doing that, I would put my dogs on the lead. Now, I know you all saw me in Leicester, or some of you saw me on my video in Leicester Square, and you're like, oh, but you didn't have your dogs on the lead. No, but actually, there's no traffic in Leicester Square. It's a pedestrian zone. There's some pigeons, some burgers lying on the ground, and a whole lot of people. But there's nothing the dog's going to dart out underneath and get run over. If I was walking down a busy road, though, and I had a couple of dogs with me, I would be inclined to try and put them on a lead if at all possible, and I would encourage everyone else to put them on a lead. Because however good and reliable your dog is, you just never know what they might see, what they might smell, what might just distract them. We've all been walking along with really good dogs and they just get distracted, and they might only go a metre or two away from you, but they just do, and you're, oh yeah, what are you doing? Get back into heel. And they come back into heel and they're good as gold. But if that happens at the wrong moment, it's just a sort of silly mindset. I see people on my way to dropping my kids at school, allowing their dogs to walk along the pavement. They go, oh, they'll never leave the pavement. They're dogs, okay? I've got pretty good dogs. We put a lot of effort into them. They're pretty reliable, but never say never, because ultimately they are dogs. I mean, it's always the sort of the thing about, why is riding a horse more dangerous than riding a motorbike? Because there's two things with independent brains rather than just one. If you're riding a motorbike, it's just you in control, and if you push it too hard and do something stupid, it's totally your fault. But if you're riding a horse, that horse could get spooked, it could get bitten, it could fall over, and completely out with your control, that horse is taking you out with itself. And your dog is an independent thinking animal. However good it is, however reliable it is, however the fact you say, oh, it's never done that before. What you mean it's never got run over and killed before? No, funny that. No, only tends to happen once. From a gun dog point of view, from a shooting, working your dog perspective, there's definitely like, my dog sits off the lead at peg. Pat myself on the back, and rightly so. You should pat yourself on the back because you put in some time and effort. It's a good skill. It really is. It's a joy to see when I'm out working dogs and I see somebody's dog sitting there good as gold, paying attention, being a well-behaved dog. You deserve to pat yourself on the back, but pat yourself on the back. Don't worry about everyone else patting you on the back, okay? Know that you can do it and not worry about everybody else. And if you then get yourself into a situation where there's a steep cliff below you, or there's just, there's a return drive, or there's a situation where you're worried about the safety of your dog, just in case, just pop them on a lead, because it's really not an issue. If they sit there with a nice loose lead around them, it's almost as impressive to watch than it is someone who's sitting there without the lead, because the really naughty dogs are on a lead and they're pulling the stick out the ground, they're pulling the peg out the ground, they're taking off across the field with sort of cartridge bags and cartridges spewing out all over the place. we know, we as good dog people, we all know each other's dogs. We look at dogs, we go, that's a nice dog. It's walking to heel to the peg. It's sitting there. Yes, the owner puts a lead on its neck because it's just sensible. And then there are situations where to increase that sort of safety angle is actually, I would always put my dogs on the lead. And for instance, not something that many of us get to do very often, but if you were doing something like driven grouse, or you were in a butt, you were shooting low partridges coming at you, or there was a particular reason that if your dog got off and ran, there's a chance that it could ruin the shooting and it could potentially get injured, just pop them on a lead. And what I generally do is I will tie one dog to another. So I'll sit a young dog down and I'll loop the lead around the older dog, and then I'll loop the other end of the lead around the younger dog, and I'll use them each as an anchor for each other, because as soon as one of them goes to pull, the other one almost does that, because they're so averse to having a tight lead around their neck. It kind of gives them a bit of a shock. I wouldn't probably tie two young brothers together, because they might just take off together. We're always using an older dog as an anchor with a younger dog. But obviously, if you don't have that, there's, your stick, a corkscrew in the ground, a peg on the chute. There's quite often when you're in grouse butts, they've got a little loop to tie your dog to. Because if your dog runs over on a grouse moor, it's really low, then your neighbours are either going to have to stop shooting, or they're going to shoot, and they're going to potentially shoot your dog. You can't go and get your dog, so it's running around there doing its own thing. You can't stand up and go and get it because it, again, isn't safe. I had a very interesting experience in Indiana a few years ago, where I went on a thing called a tower shoot, okay? And they basically release a pheasant out of a tower, and it just flies whichever way it decides to fly. And there's people placed in a clock face, at 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, etc., all the way around the tower that's in the middle. And the bird might fly to you, it might fly to your neighbor. But what I found with these gentlemen I was shooting with in Indiana was, wherever the bird was and whoever it was flying over, they were just up for getting as much lead off as possible. And if I'm totally honest, I spent most of the time hiding behind the straw bale that was my marker for fear of getting shot. Now, if I'd had a dog running around picking up, it probably would have got shot, because these things were being shot at, whether they were up high, down low, running. It didn't really matter. And I don't want to give any of your viewers in Indiana any grief to give me grief and say, oh, that's not what happens. I'm just giving you an example of something that happened to me. And that would have been a situation where my dog would have been firmly on the lead, tucked in next to me. And if I'm totally honest, I probably wouldn't do that scenario again. It wasn't fun, but it was a situation where actually you're much better off with your dog on the lead. Just pop them on a lead. Just do it. And take competitions, for example. Everyone walks around with their dog on a lead. Those are some of the best heeling dogs in the world, these Labradors who are at field trials, and yet they're all on a lead. And the reason they're on a lead is because not only are you going to have yourself disqualified, but you're also going to disqualify somebody else potentially if your dog runs off and ruins their particular kind of part of the day in the competition, and you're not going to be very popular. So there's three things. One is it prevents your dog getting worse, and it actually makes them better. If they spend time sitting on a peg or sitting in an environment on a lead, they will be easier to sit there off a lead. It makes your dog easier to teach to sit there for longer periods of time, because the thought of running off just kind of dissipates out of their mind, because they're so used to sitting there on the lead that when the lead's off, they're like, oh, I hadn't even noticed the lead was off. Then there's the safety thing about not ruining the day, or not ruining or not having your dog get injured. And that's whether because you're shooting low grouse, or because you're near a cliff or something that's just not a safe place to be. And if on that one occasion your dog decided to just move because a bird landed 3 feet away from you and ran off over a cliff, it happens. It happens to some really good dogs. It's really unfortunate. And many, many years ago, a very, very much beloved dog of mine called Tuller, who was an English Springer Spaniel, was out working with one of my team who worked for me, and she went down a bank after a wounded partridge, and she lost her footing and she went off a cliff. And I was on the other side of the world delivering some dogs, and I'm not sure the chap who took the dog shooting and never brought her home ever really forgave himself. Now, it was just one of those accidents. If she'd been on a lead, it wouldn't have really made any difference because it was the end of the drive. She was looking for birds. It was just one of those scenarios that if she, it was just a horrible scenario. But these things can happen. And generally people will always go, oh, in hindsight, I probably would have popped them on the lead. So just have a bit of foresight and worry less about your ego and think more about training your dog and what's the best, safest thing to do with your dog. Remember, you get out what you put in. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.